you're going to watch this video and be thinking about how did people experience the Middle Passage, which was one of the routes to in the Atlantic slave trade. It kind of formed a triangle, and the Middle Passage was the route from Africa to the New World. And so I really like this video because it shows a visual of what it was like on the ship, how close they were kept in quarters, and it's interesting. So for this slide, you're going to write one thing that you learned from the video about the Middle Passage. And you can't use this fact because I already told it to you, so try to find another one. The Middle Passage was one of the 3 routes taken by the Atlantic slave trade was something that I have learned. All right, and for the next slide, you're going to analyze 4 sources, and they are about life on the Middle Passage. So what it was like to ride on that ship from Africa to the New World. The essential question, or kind of what I want you to be thinking about in your head and trying to answer, is how do people experience life on in the Middle Passage? So we've got 4 sources. Source 1 is the invoice of goods. Source 2 is a layout of the slave ship. Source 3 is a narrative from Odula Iguanano. I'm not sure. I probably said that completely wrong, but that's okay. And the last one is another excerpt, Alexander, and I can't see his last name. And so for this chart, you're going to add something in this column, the main details. So tell me about the source, what stands out to you, what it's about, what it shows. And then in this column, how does this document answer the essential question, which is how do people experience the Middle Passage? So we're going to click on our source. For some reason, it pops up as like it's not the right position, so I'll show you how to rotate it. All right, so we're going to rotate it clockwise 3 times, and then it should be the right position so we can read it. All right, so for this is an invoice of goods traded for individual slaves from John Atkins's account of his journey to the West Coast in Africa. We've got 2 receipts. This one is a voyage to Guinea. This one is a voyage to the West Indies and Brazil, which I think is Brazil, but I'm not really sure. And there's a list of items that were sold or bought, and there's the prices for each one. So we've got a piece of planes, kettles, chintz, handkerchief stuff, and then a woman slave. We've got kettles, bras, rammel, whatever that is, iron, and then the price of a boy slave. We've got footies, cotton, sheets, pans, and then a man slave. So right off the bat, I noticed that humans are listed like items. They're listed on a receipt like items. And so that shows me, and I can infer, that people were treated like objects instead of humans. That is our vocabulary word, dehumanization, which is the stripping away of human attributes. And then the second thing that I noticed is the prices. A slave was worth 50, a woman slave was worth 50, a child was 35, and a man was 70. So that shows me that men were more valuable in slavery because they're doing manual labor. So the majority of the slaves were more than likely men. And the women and children were worth less. But if you look at all the other prices, the most expensive thing other than slaves is pans, which are 32, or kettles. And so that shows how much people made off of slavery. You can think about how that impacted the economy. That's why it took them so long to outlaw slavery, because the rich were making so much money off of it, and greed took over. And so that's kind of the excuse that people have, is that it fueled the economy, which is awful. So then we've got this other receipt which is very similar. So there's footies, sheets, longies, I'm not sure what those things are, gallons of brandy, iron, guns, and then a man slave, a woman slave, a man slave. They're just listed together. So I can say basically the same thing that I said over here, is that they list items together with people, and it shows how much it boosts the economy. So I'm going to go back to my chart, and I'm going to add these things. So one, you don't have to put it in complete sentences. List people along with items. Shows prices for each item. And this is kind of just, you're stating what the source was. You're thinking about the important details that you saw that made you think deeper into the source. So the list, and it shows the prices. Then over in this column, we're going to talk about what it means. So how does this document answer the essential question? I'm not sure why I capitalize those. So this source shows how expensive slaves were and how much money it put into the economy. It also shows how people were treated like cargo and items. Life for a slave on the Middle Passage was very dehumanizing. I spelled that right. Okay, and I'm going to make this a little bit smaller because I'm probably not going to have enough room. Make this 10. Yeah. Okay, I know this is probably really hard for you guys to see, so I'm going to blow this up a little bit. So the main ideas I have are list people along with items, shows prices for each item. And so what does it mean is on this side. How does the document answer the essential question? This source shows how expensive slaves were, how much money it put into the economy. It also shows how people were treated like cargo and items. Life for a slave on the Middle Passage was very dehumanizing. And so this part about the economy I want to talk about a little bit, because that is the number one kind of justification for slavery, is that it was a giant economic institution. And so that's why people kept feeding into it and then buying slaves and trading slaves. And that's what made it so dangerous, because people would think about how much money they could make instead of what it was doing to human life. Okay, and so the second source is the layout of a slave ship. So first, poster illustrating the layout of a slave ship, its physical dimensions, the number of people carried, and the conditions on board. It's a little bit hard to see, but these dashes are slaves. They had enough room to physically lay. They couldn't even stand all the way up because the floor was about 4 feet tall. And they had to lay side by side other people for the entire journey, which was sometimes 4 months. And they would be sick. They wouldn't be able to get away from someone who was sick or dying. So they literally had to lay beside them while they died. So that kind of shows, this is the head, this is the feet of a slave. And they were at the bottom of the ship, so they probably didn't get a lot of sunlight. So I'm going to describe the details that I saw. Shows people, shows the slaves laying next to each other in the cargo section of the boat. That is 2 words. Okay, and so what does it mean is on this side? This shows how closely slaves were packed and how they were, again, dehumanized. I'm going to put treated like cargo. It couldn't move around for 4 months during the journey. They were forced to lay next to sick and dying people, which was traumatizing. And the video talked about that as well, so make sure that you watch that video. Traumatizing. Okay, so now we have a narrative. It's a short quote from Aluda Equinano. That's not how you say his name, I'm sorry. Narrative describing his experience of being carried on board a slave ship at the age of 11 or 12. So you guys can probably relate to this because you guys are 11 and 12. I was soon put down under the decks, and there I received such a smell in my nostrils as I had never experienced in my life, so that with the loathsomeness of the stench and crying together, I became so sick and low that I was not able to eat, nor had I the least desire to taste anything. I now wished for the last friend, death, to relieve me. But soon, to my grief, 2 of the white men offered me food, and on refusing to eat, one of them held me fast by the hands and laid me across, I think, the windlass, and tied my feet, while the other flogged me severely. I had never, and then I'm not sure what he was going to say after that. So we can go back up here to our copy. Child describes the smell on the ship and how it made him not want to eat. White men forced him to eat. And so what does this mean? What is it? How do people experience the Middle Passage? So the smell where the slaves were kept was so disgusting that it made people not want to eat. That probably the smell came from slaves being forced to sit in their own urine and feces. It also came from decomposing corpses. Bodies. I'm just going to put that because I can't spell corpses. Okay. It also shows like that the white men were feeding him. They were doing that because he's property, and if he died, they would lose money. So it also shows how slaves were treated like property, which all of them at this point have shown that. Okay, another narrative. Excerpt from Alexander Falconbridge, an account of the slave trade on the coast of Africa, 1788. He served as a doctor, known as a surgeon on ships, on British slave ships during the 1780s. He later wrote a book, an account of the slave trade on the coast of Africa, about his experiences. The book became popular among abolitionists, or slave people who wanted to end slavery, and he later worked with the Anti-Slavery Society. Why does it only show a part of it? These are excerpts from his book. The men Negroes, on being brought aboard the ship, were immediately fastened together 2 by 2 by handcuffs on their wrists and by irons riveted on their legs. They are then sent down between the decks. That's weird that it like cuts off that sentence. That's okay. So this shows, this is a doctor's book about life on the ship. Men were shackled together. Why is that? Shackled together. This sure tells how men were chained by their hands and their feet. The life that they had on the life on the Middle Passage was degrading and torture almost for slaves. Men were the most valuable slave. All right. Well, I hope this was helpful. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Bye.